Thank you, Above. I hope everybody can see the slide and it's shared. So if you do, just let me know in the chat. Just raise your hand or thumbs up so we know that everything is there. And that's it. Let's start this. Again, thank you for organizers and big shout out to Waba for conducting these events. They are very interesting and always bring this interesting talk about Azure. I would like to thank all the attendees and welcome everybody being in this session and interest to learn about Azure Bicep. And I also would be very glad if you, after the event, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And big thanks to my family who made this possible by providing this time to spend with you guys. So in this session, we'll look into Azure Bicep, and let's jump to the next slide where you will see some information about myself, but I don't want to talk too much about it. I will just mention that I'm running this Azure blog, which is called the Cloud Marathoner, and I have been MCT, which is Microsoft Certified Trainer from 2007. And the whole idea about running this blog post is to share information about cloud and Microsoft Azure journey and encourage everyone else to share useful tips and bits just to help to make this journey enjoyable so that we can have some fun while learning important developments in cloud. Next, I want to speak a little bit about TX Solutions. This is the company where I'm employed, and this is mid-sized company and very good place to grow your career and do interesting work. And we mainly specialize in serving government and federal civilian agencies, with U.S. Census Bureau being the largest and mission critical accomplishment. So we always have some open positions. If you are interested to do some challenging work, feel free to look at our website, and I would be glad, if you consider this as your next opportunity. All right, that's it. Let's roll the main topic, what we are going to cover today. Well, first we will start by learning why to learn this Azure Bicep language. Okay, so what are the interesting things and why you should spend basically your time, your investment in learning Azure Bicep language, while there are some alternatives. Then we will look into the Azure security resources and how they could be managed easily with other Azure resources using this new Azure Bicep language and its syntax. Then we'll look into some best practices while we are getting on board with Azure Bicep, what type of tooling, what type of environment, will help you succeed in doing and performing these best practices. And I will also touch base on Bicep config file, which is more or less recent introduction into the Azure Bicep and the way how you can customize your development environment for Bicep. And finally, we'll have a number of demos and which are going to touch base not just the provisioning of resources, but I will also try to give you some hints into how you can build your GitHub workflows and actions so that all those deployment is have some testing behind. You can run some pre-flight checks and make sure that whenever you are deploying your new set of updates into Azure environment, they go through some type of process. All right, I hope that sounds interesting. Now let's look into what's Azure Bicep very quickly. Some of you might already know that because of the session that you may attended here or there. But generally speaking, Bicep is a DSL language, which is a domain specific language to create Azure resources and to maintain them. And as you may know, it's a transparent abstraction over ARM templates, which stands for Azure Resource Management Templates. And what makes Bicep different from Azure ARM templates is that it's a simpler way to create Azure resources like a code. While ARM templates are the templating way how you can describe your Azure resources, in Bicep language, you will see that it's more like writing a code and then compiling that into ARM templates, or just posting them to Azure ARM layer so that it can provision and maintain your Azure resources. So as we said, it's a transpile Azure Bicep language code get transpiled into these ARM templates. Okay, if you visualize what I just tell you, it's something that will look like in the picture, where you will see that you have this Bicep language on top, and then you have ARM templates that it can get compiled into, and then of course we have this Azure Resource Manager layer, which actually manages all those clients and basically apply this configuration, apply your commands into the Azure environment, which you have access to. All right. So next thing I want to look into is why Bicep language, right? So there should be certain things that you should feel that there are some features, there are some benefits that you can go and look into that. But instead of going through the list, I wanna switch to the Visual Studio Code with everybody, and let me know once you see, guys, the Visual Studio Code. Does everybody see it? Thumbs up would be appreciated. All right, great. So why I switched to this one, I want you to show, guys, difference between Azure ARM template, a simple Azure ARM template, and the Bicep language. So here in this example, and this is before actually talking about this environment, I want to show you the repo, which is GitHub repo. Let me make sure it's just a second, guys. Okay, so basically the Azure GitHub repo that you can refer to will actually has all the examples and all the files that I'm going to demo today. So whenever you need to check something on, or you try to do something on your own after the session and it didn't work out, just look here or let me know, and we'll make sure that you get that thing working on your environment as well. But here basically this is the repo that I'm going to actually put the link in the chat as well, just for everyone to make sure that if you want later on, you can have an access to that. All right, so here in this GitHub repo, I also created these Azure Bicep blog posts that are addressing certain things, like when you are trying to start working with them and you want to, let's say, integrate certain resources for the security, like Azure Key Vault, or you want to make some hardening of parameters that you have. You can refer into these languages, but this is basically the repo that I'm going to show all the demos from. Okay, so I just wanted to set it straight. And now I actually open this repo, okay? And here under the ARM.json samples, this is the folder. I'm going to, sorry, under the modules, actually, there's this minimum storage. So what you see now, let me make it a little bigger. I hope it's visible and comfortable to everyone. We see a declaration of a storage account. It's a very simple storage account using the Azure Bicep declaration, where we have the name, which needs to be unique name for that storage account, the location, which refers to the resource group where it's going to be provisioned, then the type of the storage account, and two tags, right? So it's very concise. There's no extra declarations. But what happens if we take the same Azure Bicep language and look at how it will and transform that into ARM template, so that we can see how its ARM template browser is going to look like. So to do that in Azure Bicep, you need to make sure that you have Azure CLI installed and Bicep feature enabled on that Azure CLI, or you need to have your PowerShell, which I'm going to talk more later. So here, for example, if I type Azure Bicep before running command and then version, we want to make sure that the version of we have Azure Bicep installed on our environment. So if you already have that in place, the command that would take this minimum dash storage bicep and convert into a ARM.json is just simple build command, which we will type az bicep build. Then we need to put dash f would mean that we need to put the path to that bicep file. In our case, it is located under modules. and we have it under minimum dash storage. So now I'm going to press on enter and let's see what happens. So as you see here on the left side, we actually get a new file generated, and this is minimum. It is the same name as the Bicep file, but there's a .json extension, which refers to the extension of the ARM template. And this ARM template, as you see, it's here. So let's go ahead and compare these two files, the one we just generated and the one that, let me actually make sure that both are here, Bicep JSON, good. And now I'm going to make sure that we can compare them side by side. Okay, is it visible to everyone? Looks good. Okay, thank you for thumbs up. That keeps me on track so that everybody is still here. So okay, so here on the left side, this is the declaration of Bicep language description of storage account, where we have the resource type, right? It's a storage account. There's a API version. That's what this stands for. And the other things we already explained. On the right side, I'm going to switch this to the right side. We have the JSON schema, right? This schema belongs to the ARM template. Then it have a versioning of this content. We have a metadata. So metadata is actually interesting thing because it will tell us how this ARM template has been generated. And when you look at that, you will see that it says it generated from a Bicep. This was the version of Bicep that has been used to generate this, and then there's a hash. So when we actually take this out and look at the rest, you would see that it actually has a lot of similarities, right? So as we mentioned before, we have a type here. So storage account type, which is defined also on our ARM declaration. API version is actually a separate property here, while it is part of the Bicep type that we had. Then if you look at the name, it is same name there. Location refers to the resource group is a function that is used in this template. And then we have type, kind of the storage, and then the tags and everything looks same. So from the perspective of, difference, again, when you look at Bicep language, code and ARM template, they are both doing the same thing in terms of declaring your Azure resources, but Bicep language does that more in a programming language way, where you have more concise declaration, and in ARM template it's just use the JSON and all the declarations that it has. Okay, but in terms of lengths, you would see that of course your JSON declaration is going to be much longer. And this is not much visible on this sample. If you take other live samples, which I'm going to show you later on, you would see that that declaration and conciseness of Azure Bicep language is actually going to be much better. So it's easier to maintain Bicep language code than ARM template JSONs. Templates in ARM JSON. All right, so I'm going to scroll back now to why Bicep language slide and go through 10 reasons why it is better. So first of all, as you saw, it is easy to understand and maintain Bicep language. If you have a little bit, coding experience, and or even if you are Azure IT, if you are IT pro or DevOps person, you would like that one much better. Second, differentiation day one support. So what it means that whenever there is some change in API, in Azure API of the service, then those things can be readily referenced and used in your Azure Bicep language, and as well as in ARM template. But you can't use that in a third-party tools like Terraform, because Terraform would require some updates on their end in order to make those API versions and features available. So there's day one support with either Bicep language or ARM template. Then transparent abstraction. So Bicep language actually compiles into ARM JSON. So it is another abstraction which makes your life easier to maintain your Azure resources. It has awesome tooling in Visual Studio Code. So what I mean by that? So here I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and you see here, not a lot of code. Let's switch to another sample. Let's say this container one, right? So here, with all this, whenever you scroll into, let's go to the one that actually has better examples. With containers, nope. Those with parameters. Okay, so here basically it's another declaration and use of Azure Bicep under the file name storage-param.bicep. And here you see we have descriptions, we have some specific kind of list of values from where this name prefix needs to be selected. We have some validation. So all these actually are powered by the extension called Azure Bicep extension. And where it is, if you click on our extensions here and type Bicep, okay, this extension is actually one of the best extensions for Bicep language development, which is maintained by Microsoft. So make sure that you install that whenever you are dealing with Bicep language, because it will give you all the recommendations. There will be autocomplete and plus a number of other very cool features like referencing other files and modules that will make your, again, will make your development experience of Azure resources much easier, smoother, and pleasant. So you can enjoy that. All right, I'm going to switch back now. So this was Bicep extension that I talked about. So next, what we have is clean code and syntax. And what we mean by that, because of these things, because of those automations and IntelliSense that come with Bicep extension, it actually keeps your code in a way that it follows most of the best practices. And if you don't, then you will get those warnings in yellow squiggly lines and stuff like that, which will, which is a nice thing to have. Then code reuse and modularity. So there are ways how the Azure Bicep is actually much easier to maintain and reuse the code using the modules that we are going to cover today. There's, again, deep integration with Azure. There's a pre-flight validation. So for those who were already using, for example, ARM templates or PowerShell or in PowerShell or Azure CLI, they know that there is a pre-flight validation that you can run before deploying your resources, where this command will make a call to Azure, to the ARM layer of Azure, and ask that, hey, I'm going to deploy these 3 resources in a given state. Now, what would be the change? Are they all new deployments, or they are actually update on existing deployments that going to have these few properties to be updated? So those things are called pre-flight validation, which is a great way to know beforehand what change you are going to apply to your Azure environment, and plus just to check your ARM, to check your deployment to make sure that there is no obvious error in that, so that your deployment doesn't fail in the middle. Okay, and no state management. This is true for the people who are familiar with Terraform way of deployment, where you have to maintain your state files. That's not a necessity with Azure Bicep. And production support. I'm going to touch about that. Previously, before March, we didn't have any production support with Bicep language, but starting with the version 0.3 and above, if you get into any issues with Azure Bicep language and while using that in production, or you are doing some POC and you want to get that resolved, Microsoft official support, you can open, actually at that, let me back up. You can open official support ticket with Microsoft support because this product, the Azure Bicep language, is on an official support language. So it's not just another kind of alpha or beta language where you get 0 support, but it is fully supported language, so a fully supported technology that you can request your support ticket and get resolved. Okay, that said, let's look into the evolution of Azure Bicep very quickly. But before looking at that thing that you saw, you can actually run that command on your Visual Studio Code and see how it happens. And the way to do that is if you type Azure Bicep --help, you will see that it has only a few commands, so which is good, right? You don't have to remember or do magic stuff here, and they're all well described here. So in order to see how this Azure Bicep actually evolved over time. We just need to go ahead and type Azure Bicep list versions. And if I didn't make any typo, we'll get the results back here. And as you see here, right, it actually started with alpha, which was there back in 2020. It was August 2020 when it was first kind of announced. And then by March, this real version where you get the most of the things actually in a way that you can use it was the version 0.3. And currently we are actually way back in the version, let me go back here. We are on the version 0.4.1008. So, and currently all the demos that you would see, they are all using this latest version of 0.4. All right. So if we reiterate through the things that I just told, it's just all about, again, when it started, you can start, official support started with the version 0.3, latest version. And what about the roadmap? So the good thing about Azure Bicep language is that you can get involved in shaping this product, right? And attend to the community calls, because this is open source project that Microsoft is developing. And the roadmap for this year is that to get into the version 0.5, which will have fully functional repositories for the codes where you can store your modules and reuse them from there, and plus some other features. But overall, if you are looking for a stable version, in current roadmap, what the Microsoft actually announced is that by February 2022, they are actually targeting to get into the stable version 1.0. So that's kind of roadmap for you. If your CTO, your senior technical manager asking, okay, this product, when we are going to get the mature one, that's the time frame at this point. Any questions so far in the studio? Just put that into the chat, okay? Thank you. All right, so regarding how to start with Bicep, I'm not going to tell there, everybody knows how to go ahead and install it, but I'm going to remind you about one simple thing that may be overlooked while you are doing that, and that's if you are trying to use Azure Bicep, you need to make sure that your Azure CLI version is 2.20 or later one, and you need to make sure that you are either using Azure PowerShell Core or a PowerShell that's 5.6 and later. That's all what you need to know. All right. All right. Now let's have a quick look into Bicep concept, Azure Bicep concepts. And there are some of them you already saw the glimpse of them, right? And if you look at them, it's basically around parameterization, how you can introduce certain things to make sure that there's enough validation, and plus the difference between parameterization and variables that most of you probably know from your coding skills, and plus using the modules, right? So if you let's look at these things on a Visual Studio example here. All right, so I'm going to close this terminal, and we are going to navigate to this storage param file. Okay, here we go. So in terms of certain declarations, the basics of Azure Bicep language, I want to start with description. And you may refer that into that squiggly lines, not squiggly, but backslash, right? These two backslashes where you can put your comments. So that corresponds to the same thing that you do there, but there's a difference, of course. The difference is that this name prefix, right? So it has some purpose. And once this name prefix is used within your code, this is function of the Visual Studio and Bicep language, you would see that the same description will appear under it. So in a long line, when you have like hundreds, hopefully, you don't have such experience, but if it ends up that you have 100 lines of code, it's much easier to know what this specific, parameter is supposed to do by just hovering and looking at that. The next thing that you see on this sample, let me make it bigger. Okay, that you see that this is actually not a just regular parameter, but it has this specific set of values from where it can get the value. And this is the ones that we see here. It's a these are the name prefixes, right, that are defined. So these things will also appear there, which is neat feature if you are analyzing a number of lines of code and trying to figure out what's going on. All right. Then there are like some other features that you can look into, but it mainly comes to the point that, hey, if you are doing this deployment on the same environment or different environments, how you want to make sure that you don't get into issues of like unique name for your storage account, or the, you know, when you deploy the same thing on the same resource group, you want to get the consistent result, right? And at that point, the best way to do that is to make sure that whenever you define your names, it has certain scope. So in this sample that we see, it is scoped actually to the resource group. But let me not jump too much into that. I just want to go briefly through that. The parameter declarations are happening here with, you know, certain validation on top of it, like description, min and max lengths. Then, of course, we have different types of parameters. Then at the end, I want to show you some, you know, ways that how you can add some type of compliance, company-related compliance into your code, right? So the easiest one that you can start with is locking your data resources from deletion, because there's a number of scenarios where, yes, there's a soft delete and other features that you can enable on those resources, but the best things to prevent them, even from the people who have administration privileges to do that, is to put the lock resource. And in this case, you know, this is done through declaring this lock resource group. Resource type is Microsoft.authorization logs, and then we make sure that this don't delete log, cannot delete, on a cannot delete level, is applied on the storage account that's defined here. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and deploy and look at that, there's already samples that I did that. So for storage parameter, if you want to go and do that type of things, I defined the scripts here, and in demo scripts, so where you define the log, you can easily go and deploy it. Just in case, you know, we want to do that, let me actually do that with everybody here. Just this small demo before actual them. Let's see. Yeah. I'm going to now bring the, so what we are going to do now is that we have this, you know, we have this file, Azure Bicep file. Let's see what's supposed to do. It's supposed to form a storage name, okay, with all lowercase. That's going to use some name prefix from these values that are set. It's going to add the unique string that's based on the resource group name, you know, from where it is going to be deployed. And then it has geo redundancy that needs to be checked. In our case, if it is true, then it's going to be standard geo redundant, otherwise it's going to be locally redundant storage, and it's going to apply a lock on top of our storage account so that even when I go and try to delete that, it's going to prevent that. So to give that example, we need first to declare and provision this storage account. And whenever you don't see you don't see here anything, meaning that it's called scope where you actually deploy your resource. For example, here, as you see, there's a target scope, okay, subscription. So what does it mean? It means that if you go and deploy this file, it's going to try to deploy itself into the subscription because it has a resource group and other kind of resources that require subscription scope. Okay, that's why it's explicitly defined. But in our previous example where we are, which is storage-param.bicep, if there is no scope defined, that means that by default, Azure Bicep is going to use the resource group as a scope, meaning that you need to have your resource group provisioned first, and then you need to deploy this Azure Bicep storage, this lock, into that resource group. But before doing that deployment, right, I want to mention that I'm actually using this deployment based on the module. I'm using that as a module which is passed to another file. So in our case, this is this file, deploy storage with log, which is under the samples. So as you see here, resource group name is defined, right? It's a storage ECUS demo. Then we define the region. And after that, it's actually creates a resource group with a given region, and it gives these two tags. And then it's actually deploys our storage dash param bicep from the file we just looked into, okay? And it makes sure that it's, and it just passed this parameter to make sure that we use locally redundant storage. That's the flag there. All right, so this is the deploy storage with log sample. So if you want to deploy that yourself and see how it works, I have a little bit set of demos deployed here. So you need to switch into this demo-scripts AZCLI, okay? And here you will see that, you know, there are like a couple of samples, and the one that deploys this is actually using this deployment script. So let's look what's in this deployment script. All right. So in this deployment script, okay, let me move it and move it here and take this out. So in this deployment script, what we're saying that, okay, we are going to take this deployment file, okay, which is the deploying the storage account with the log and the resource group onto the subscription. But before doing that, we are going to run the pre-flight check. So to make sure it's actually working fine, these files are under the samples. So we see that it's under the samples folder. So one thing that we will do, we'll type az deployment. Okay, then we'll make sure it's a subscription level deployment. We'll create it. And then you can either type location as you see, or just -L. It is abbreviation for that. And then for deploy to deploy that file, you can type either what you see there, or we need to type that it is under the samples. All right, and this 3 deploy storage with log. So, and of course we want to make a pre-flight check validation, which means that we put -C at the end. And once we press enter, what is going to happen behind the scene is that Azure Bicep is going to take our deployment 3-deploy storage with log bicep file, okay, and then send all the resources that's going to deploy into the subscription where I'm trying to deploy that, and then give back this pre-flight check validation. So what we see here, let's look at that. I scrolled up, so I hope it's visible for everyone. This is where we actually start our command. And then all the green one means that, you know, Azure Bicep went and looked into my subscription, and it found that there is no such a resource group called storage ECUS2, like this one here. Okay. And let me make sure yeah, so this was missing. So that's why I say, okay, I'm going to deploy this storage. I'm going to deploy this resource group named storage-ECUS2-demo. Then it says that I'm going to deploy this storage account. Okay, this is the storage account name that's going to deploy. And then it's going to, after it is deployed, at the end, you see that it actually has this lock deployed, do not delete lock. This is on the right side here. Okay, this is the where it is, you know, telling us about that, and then it's going to be done. So let's, if we are okay with that, we have an option here. We can say yes, continue deploying, or not. So we are going to say yes, you know, continue deployment, and then, you know, it's going to take the same things again and run for the deployment. So while this thing is running, what we can do, we can switch into the Azure portal and see, you know, how our deployment will look like. Because in the resource group, we should have a deployment folder. Let me show you that. So we switched back to now, let me make it, yep, bigger. I hope it's bare and visible. So we have 10 resource groups now. Okay, that is that resource group didn't appear yet. So let's switch back to our, it's still running. So while it is running, I want to go back to our presentation and go through the slides, because it can take, you know, a couple seconds here and there, so that we can look at the final result there. All right. So where we looked into these certain concepts in Bicep, where we looked into the parameterization, modules, how modules are defined, and reference existing Bicep files, and how they are used to this string interpolation, where we put the strings and the prefixes to get more meaningful names for our resources. All right. So next thing is Bicep file visualizer, and what it is basically a way that you, if you have a complex deployment where you have multiple resources and you want to look into the relationship between those resources, you can use that feature. So, oh, here it is. We see. So let me show you these guys before it's done. So you see that we get back the response from this deployment. And if you switch back now to the portal, we see that it says 11 resource groups now. And the one that we just deployed is called storage EastUS demo 2, which is here. All right. So I'm going to click on that. And now, if you look at it, we see that it's actually deployed this storage account. But that's not all, right? Because if you go and look into the logs, that was the most important part. You see that log is also there. So what does it mean? It means that if I have an admin or contributor privilege and I go and say, okay, delete this, let me see where, delete this, you know, storage account, it should prevent us. So that's kind of like some of the beauties where you take some security controls and bake them into your resource groups, okay, into your, so this thing should fail. It will take some time. No, all right. Any guess how long it can take, guys, who are watching this demo? So usually it's going to fail. If it would be able to delete it right away, there was no issue, no kind of logs or anything, it would happen right away. But because of this, you see, it takes some time. And the reason why it's rotating and it's going to show the failure, this is because of the resource log that we actually put as a part of the deployment. Okay, so while it is still going,
what do you see in the activity log there?
Let's see, just a second. You mean like this activity log here, correct?
Towards the,
no, it didn't. It's not there. It usually takes some time. Here it is. Here's an error message saying error, doing this. And when you look at it, it would say that please remove the log and try again. All right. So that's kind of like making, and from the rule of thumb, whenever certain things like delete usually doesn't take too much on a storage account, but when you see that, it takes more time, it means that something is preventing, hence going to try that. So anyway, so this we saw what we were expecting to see, which is failure on deleting that resource group storage on a given resource group because of the lock. Okay, so let's go back to our slide where we were. So another example I want to show you is that whenever you have in real life scenario, you are not going to deal with just let's deploy this storage account or let's deploy this, let's deploy this app service, right? It's going to be complex, meaning that you'll have a solution which will most probably have some virtual machines in it, some storage accounts, some virtual networks, and some other resources that are going as a part of the unit that you want to scale, right? That's how the resource groups are supposed to help you. So to do that, I'm going to switch to Visual Studio Code. All right. And this time what we are going to do is that there's this nice sample of, within the samples folder here, if you navigate to the deploy module with parameters, okay, this is one sample where this deployment actually has a number of resources in them. And one of the good practices that these deployment files have, most of the deployments of resources like storage, Cosmos DB, and resource groups, they are all referencing the modular approach. And if you want to look, what exactly this, for example, this Cosmos DB module is deploying, you can press on Control and navigate your mouse. It will become clickable. So once you click on that, you would go right to that file and see what's going on there. But the main purpose why I came and landed on this file, 7-deploy modules, is because if it's first time you look at that or you forget what it's doing, you can always go here on top and click on this icon. That icon is going to visualize, let me take this out. That icon here on the left is going to visualize all the resources and their relationships within this given deployment. So for example, here we can set it has some type of app service that has app service and as well as application service plan. Then it has storage module, and they are using actually some common storage under it. There's a local resource group on the storage account, and plus we have a VM that comes with all the infrastructure that it needs to be supported within this my resource group. Okay, and this is called Azure Bicep Visualizer, which is a neat feature that appeared, I believe, in the around like July months of this year. All right, so this is this is one way how you can use that. Another way is that you can get it from the portal as well. And just to show you what I said, so probably you are familiar with that, most probably, because here in the deployment portal, I switched to that. There's a Azure ARM template visualizer, and if you go and look into, let's look at all resources here, just a second. I clicked on all resources. Okay, so under this all resources, let's go to this resource group. And this resource group, as you see, it has number of resources, right? So we have these 4 resources. Under the deployments here, if you never use that export deployment for this resource group, it's going to generate, of course, ARM template representation of these resources in a given resource group. But the important thing that I want you to show is that this deployment itself, ARM JSON, also have that visualizer, which will appear here once this template is parsed. Well, here you go. So we have this visualized template here. So you can also use that one just to get understanding in terms of connections and resources, how they are connected to each other, and get a better grasp in terms of relationship of this resource to each other. All right. Okay, I'm going to switch out from here back to resource groups, and next, actually, let's jump to the slides. Next thing is that there are certain demos I want to actually show you. Some of them we kind of jumped in the middle of the presentation, but first one was to look into Azure Bicep and quick demo of the Bicep extension. That's what we looked, and just quick look into the storage account. Next, there are like more samples about how we can bake in some security policies into our deployment. And one way to do that, let me show you. That's it. So what we are going to do now is, just a second. We are going to look into demo where we are going to take some security policy, and apply that into our environment by deploying the definition, policy definition, and policy assignment. Okay, so what this demo is going to be about, just to be clear, let's look at the environment where we are. We have this policy, right, resource. I hope you had the chance before to look at that. And this policy resource defines, any any assignments that you have, and they are basically run these checks, sometimes run those checks to see that which resources are compliant, and they can also enforce compliance by denying creation or update of the resources. So in our case, in assignments, when we click there, we have these three policies, right? So Azure security benchmark, and we have some data protection related ones. So what I'm going to do now is that we want to make sure that that Azure subscription where we are, let me just go back again there. So when we look at all resources, okay, and I click on locations, you see that all locations are East US and East US 2, okay, but we have one North Europe location. So imagine a scenario that where you want to lock your subscription or your resource group, depending on the scope, to make sure that only East US and West US, as well as East US 2 and West US 2 locations are used, and any other Azure regions shouldn't be used to deploy or update current resources. So if you want to enforce that, then the Azure policies are here to help you. And with Azure Bicep language, there is a nice way to do that. There's easier way to do that. For example, under the samples, we have this deployment example number 4. And what it does, it's basically it says, okay, this policy is going to be deployed on a subscription level. It has a list of the desired locations that we want to enforce. Then, of course, as a policy effect, it always has like audit or deny. There's 2 options only, where deny will make sure that any new deployments are going to be checked, and if it doesn't satisfy your policy, it's going to prevent the deployment from happening. And then we have description of this policy, right? So this policy is actually a custom policy. It has policy name, but the main purpose here is that where you want to be, looking is a policy rule. And under the policy rule, it defines the locations and what are the allowed locations to be, under the allow of. So this condition is there, and effect, meaning that if this condition is satisfied, then here is going to apply that's either going to deny or audit. So audit means that you will have logs of all the violations. Deny would means it will prevent from happening. So once we have this actually definition, policy definition, the second resource you need to have in place is to actually assignment that's going to appear on the assignments in the Azure policy. And here we basically reference that location policy definition, and we put the display name, how it should display on our policy tab, wherever we are going to deploy it. And then, it's going to apply the policy effect and allowed locations. I hope it's clear for everybody. So to apply this resource number for deploy sub policies, what you would need to do is just, fire up your terminal, of course, and then it's going to be applied again on the subscription level. And to do that, you would just need to go and run this AZ deployment sub, which is subscriptions, and run this template. So I'm going to run this template now. And let's make it here. So first we run the pre-flight validation, say, okay, what you want to do, you want to enforce them or just audit? In our case, I'm going to choose the option 2, which is deny. And because we are running that on a pre-flight mode, which means that we put the -c there, what actually is going to happen is that on a first try, it's going to bring the change that we see here, all the green ones that we show, previously, right? These are all the changes that are going to happen. And say, okay, that's what we expect to happen. Let's press on Y. And then it's going to ask us to do the same thing, because we have to enter this effect of policy where we want to deny and not audit. And now it's going to deploy this policy into the subscription. And while deployment is going on, let's go back to the policies. I'm navigating to the policies, and here, if you click on assignments and refresh, and we see that it's already there, this restrict locations for Azure resources. It's already there, and it has all the definitions that we put in our deployment file. And if you look at the deployment, actually I came back to Visual Studio Code, and it looks that everything went as expected. It succeeded. So what we should expect after this definition and policy is deployed, it usually takes around like half an hour for this policy to take effect. All right. And under the overview, you see when we scroll here and restrict locations for Azure resources, you see it's not started. So it will take some time to do. And while still going, you know, we're going to try another demo while still going, and then we'll come back. And we should see that it's not compliant because one of the resources, as you saw, it was in a North Europe, I believe, region, which is not compliant region. But now we have this, okay, this policy already appearing on our policy list, which is good. All right, next. Next deployment is modular deployment parameterization and the decompile. I want to spend a little bit more time on decompile and speak a little bit about this demo 4 because it looks like our time is almost there. So what is a decompile, right? So decompile is a way that you can use. Let me put it down. Okay. So decompile is a way you can use to take your resources, your ARM.json template, existing ARM.json template, and turn that into a Bicep language template. All right. And in my case, you can of course start with the simple ones and look how that decompile is working, or you can go and take the real one from your existing deployment. You can extract your ARM template and try to run it there. But keep in mind that decompile is auto-generated code, and it's not the most nicest, and it will have some errors in it. And to prove and this is the way how it's expected to be, that you have to come up and make some cleanup to make sure that it is nice and neat and can be used. And to show you the concept here under ARM.json JSON samples, you see that, you know, I have this different bicep demo.app.json. So what is this JSON file is? It's pretty long file actually. It goes, you know, hundreds and styles. But here, let me see that. If you look at the ARM template visualizer, okay, you will see that it actually has a number of resources that are deploying some other resource. So there's a close to like 30 resources in it that get deployed and configured. And this is actually currently deployed into one of the resource groups in my subscription. But the main idea here is that what we are going to do is that we'll take this ARM template JSON, which we have in our environment, and try to decompile that into Bicep and look, you know, how the output will look like. And plus we'll go and try to understand what are the errors and warnings and how we can resolve them. All right, that's the, you know, main idea here. Is everybody with me? What we are trying to do? We took the ARM JSON template, which has 30 resources in it, and we are going to run Bicep decompile command to look into auto-generated Bicep language code. All right. Is everybody following? So far, so good. All right. Thank you. Thank you, above. So what we are going to do now is that it's pretty straightforward and simple. You know, there's nothing hard in it, even though it sounds complex, right? So this is our template, bicep demo app c.json, right? So I'm going to delete this file for now because we don't need it. All right. So from this file called bicep app-json, we are going to run the decompile. So how we can run it is it's pretty simple. You just say az bicep, okay? Then the name of the command, which is decompile. But if you forget how to type it, like sometimes I do, you can always run the help. You can say az bicep help, and here it appears. And once the help is there, okay, we are going to say, okay, let's go type az bicep, decompile, all right? And then we need to put the path to that file, what we are trying to decompile, the arm.json, which is in our case under the arm.json samples folder, arm.json dash samples folder, and this bicep demo app dash c JSON, right? So let's see if I can take this here. So you see that I typed the path, and we are going just to press enter. So what we should expect is that in the same location from where we are doing that, it should actually create this bicep demo dash app dash c dot bicep converted file. But while doing that, it's actually going to show a lot of warnings. There would be a number of warnings, and some of them are actually failed. Yes, the compilation is the best effort, is not guaranteed. Okay. Okay, as you see, we get into error. All right, that's good. Good or bad, who knows? So basically, even though we run this, right, and we get these errors, the file itself, the bicep demo app dot dash dash c bicep is actually generated. You see, so and this error is just kind of warnings that, hey, you know, there was some errors, you better look at that. So we are not going to get scared with that error message, right? Or do we? So then I'm going to open this newly decompiled file. And you see there's a lot of things here. But one thing that I wanted to point is that instead of going through all of them, the best thing, the first thing that you want to do is whenever you see this file, sometimes the tiers is basic. So some of them are repetition of code. And if it is a read-only declaration, you can actually go and remove them like this, okay? And how we would know that we actually fix our file is that once we get the bicep file and we cleaned it up, but let's do the following actually. So before jumping the guns here, I want to make sure that how we would know that we actually fix our bicep file. Okay, the way how you can know that is if you cannot take this file and compile into ARM.json, then it means that there is certain errors. Okay, that's the kind of indication. To do specifically that thing, I'm going to take our existing bicep app-c JSON and kind of change this file name. There's other way how you can do that using the output and stuff like that, but I don't want to complicate this. I'll just say dash, you know, original. Okay, so this is our original JSON file from which we did, and this is our bicep demo app-c bicep, which we have complaints on that we need to fix. So here, the way to fix it, again, wherever you see this, if you had some experience with ARM JSON templates, it may help, but the point here is that, you know, you need to go actually to the errors like this. And this is actually comes from some type of repetition that certain things are repeated and regenerated on a bicep language output. That's why it's causing this. And we are going to delete this queue here because queue is already defined for this child property. And another one is here. We are going to delete this queue as well. And you can try to do that without deleting this queue. It will throw an error. Let me kind of show that before doing this change. I forgot to do that. All right. So this is our bicep. Let me close this. All right. So this is our bicep file that get generated, you know, to decompile. What we are going to do is that we are going now to make an attempt to build a bicep demo-app-c .json, ARM representation of that, and that should fail because there's some issues in our Bicep file. And when we try to do that, just to show that, you know, what's the error and how you would know if it is working or not. AC Bicep build, if you remember that command, -f, and then we put the folder name, and then we put the Bicep demo app -c dot bicep. And why we put that, we want to generate ARM JSON template to make sure that our Bicep is valid. So when we try this one, you see we get an error, and we didn't get any ARM JSON. And the reason why we get this error, because our Bicep template has some, you know, some issues that needs to be cleaned up. All right, so this is good. I was expecting this error. Now I'm going to go back and clean up this file, which is usually it's duplicated entries on the SKU and some read-only properties. All right. And I'm not going to touch other ones, but you can remove some of them. So once we remove those things, okay, and usually this read-only tiers needs to be removed. That's okay. Anything here? Fine. So what we are going to do now, we are going to repeat the same command. Okay, we should generate the .json representation. It should generate the same file with .json, which is going to be our ARM representation of Bicep. Okay, that's the purpose. And we type az Bicep. So now we are trying to build it, right? So we can get the ARM JSON representation -f folder name, and then the name of the Bicep file, which is app-c. Okay, this is the Bicep. So fingers crossed. I hope it wouldn't. Yeah, that's good. So yellow, it means warning, but it didn't fail, which means that if we go and look into our files, we should see .json of the same file in the same folder. Let's open it. Okay, this is .bicep. This is the one. So you see it's generated, meaning that we have a valid Bicep file. But to reiterate, you know, I think we are over time a little bit. To reiterate that, whenever you are trying to take your existing ARM JSON template and compile into the Bicep, you will get errors and warnings. And the best way is to go and clean them up is just to look into what's the warning. Sometimes you would have to Google a little bit, of course. But then once you clean it up, the next step is basically to validate that whatever you cleaned up is actually worked. All right. And I'm going to jump here. Baba, how much minutes do we have? It's like 5-10 minutes. Do you have such much?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
All right. Just kind of checking time here. So here I came back to our policy. Okay. And I want to refresh this. If you remember, guys, we deploy the policy and we say, okay, let it bake, let it do the job. It usually takes some time. Okay, restrict location Azure resources. I think I jumped the console. Let's go to the review. Here we go. That's great. So we see that it says, okay, restrict location for Azure. There is non-compliant resource. And if you remember, we had this North Europe location. And it appears here, it says that your Bicep North 116 is in a non-compliant state. You can click on details and it will give you information why it is non-compliant. Okay, it's based on that current value must be in the turn. No, not this one. Okay, see, current value is not one of those targeted for regions, and this happened here, right? If you go to your Azure Bicep, not Azure Bicep, sorry. If you go to your portal and try to create a resource which is outside of that 4 locations that we defined, East US, West US, and number 2 at the end, you will still get the error on your portal. Okay, you wouldn't be able to do that. Not just you, but anybody else, you know, who has the privileges to do that. Anyway, so this was a small example. Another one is the actually usage of Azure Key Vault, right? Because whenever we deal with anything that has like connection strings or sensitive information like passwords, you want to make sure that it's not plain text. And the best way to do that is you want to integrate your security service like Azure Key Vault to keep them all in that central repository, safe and fine. So to do that, this one is actually, oops, let me go back to again to the same repo that we are using. Here under the samples, if you navigate, you will see that we have this number 11, deploy SQLDB with Key Vault Bicep. So what it does is basically, it's a Bicep code that defines, certain parameters like SQL Server name, admin login, subscription ID, your Key Vault resource group, where is your Key Vault where is your Key Vault actually provisioned. And then, of course, you need to have a secret that's holding this sensitive information. In our case, it's example password that needs to be the secret name. And just to show you on the portal so that you know what I'm talking about here. So we should have a Key Vault here. Let me go to the Key Vault services. All right, so we have one Key Vault service that is deployed in the resource group called Key Vault deploy. All right, and here actually what we have under the secrets, we have this I think it was example password, the secret name. So this is the secret name, and each secret, as you know, it has like value under it. So in our case, it's here, located here, and can be accessed here. Once you copy, you can see that. So, but basically, this is the Key Vault that's already in our environment. You can also deploy that through the scripts, but it has a secret in it. And what this deployment does, 11 deployment SQLDB, and you can access that in this Key Vault deployment sample. So what it does is basically takes that sample and deploys it. And while deploying that sample, it's going to take the user password, not the user. We have the SQL admin, password, and it's going to get from this location. And the good thing is that if you are deploying into the sensitive environments where you want to make sure that the people who are actually running the deployment or the service principal that's running the deployment doesn't have access everywhere, or you want to make sure that it's not exposed. Actually, it's not exposed on your GitHub repo or any visual or any code, source code that you are using, source control basically that you have. Then you want to make sure you use those things. But to give you understanding, of course, we can deploy this. What it's actually doing is that within this SQLDB Bicep, we are passing in the actual value of our secret, basically the password, into the module where it's used to deploy the resource itself. And if you navigate to this module, let me navigate there. Okay, you will see that this module is actually deploys that under the, it has some default name for a login, SQL Server name, admin password needs to be secured, and depending on which type of password or sensitive information you pass, it's good to put some type of validation to make sure that it's compliant. And then of course you put other validations, and at the end what it does basically take that and deploy the and it deploys your Microsoft SQL Server into that database, okay? And we give the name and database name, and that's what it does. So before wrapping up and going to the questions, I want to just kick off that deployment and then we'll be back, okay? So let's do that. And to do that, again, we just need to go back to our resources, kick off our terminal, and then just, kick this deployment. And I don't have any pre-flight validation at the end. It's just going to ask these things like what the SQL Server name and other things, and once you complete them, deployment will go ahead and start working. But this is not all, right? It wouldn't be a real good solution if you don't have your workflows, you don't have your GitHub actions and stuff like that. So this repo actually has that, but I don't think we have enough time to cover it today. So under the workflows, we have this main.deployment YAML file. And what it does, it's basically does all the things that we talked today in automated way. So it's going to run the pre-flight validation, run the linting for you and everything. And then if everything is okay, then it will deploy only the code. And to do that, this is the basically job and their descriptions. And, and it's going to go through all the steps. And just kind of to give you high level understanding what you should get after forking that or looking into that. In the actions, you should get at least these two workflows. One is a security scan, and another one is your deployment of this main site, which is taking the code that's under the deploy folder. And if there's any change in the main.bicep, it's going to kick off this deployment. And each deployment is going to have those jobs that are described, the linting, validation, and the actual deployment. All right. So, Vavav, do you want to kick off this deployment and show it? Do we have time for it?
We have roughly over 12 minutes or 11 minutes.
All right. So I will just kind of show this. So if anybody is interested, they can actually run that and see how it works. But this is basically everything that I basically discussed, the automated way how you can wire up and make sure that you don't you have kind of automated deployment of your Bicep resources into the desired environment. And that said, let me just kind of show it here. This is the deployment folder and main Bicep that I talked about. Okay. That said, let me kind of wrap up the slides here. Okay, just a second. All right, so what we look into that, we looked into what's the Bicep language, right? And why we should give an attention into that, how it can make our life easier. Second, we looked on certain security resources and how to apply them in our deployments. Then we looked into certain best practices when you are trying to decompile your ARM templates into Bicep, and you want to have less cluttered and more clean syntax for deployment, and some demos along the way. So here's the actual main part. So the repo and everything that I showed, it's actually located in this Learn Bicep. So you can always access that and look there. This is the LinkedIn way how we can get connected. Project Bicep on GitHub is actually an official project of Microsoft where they actually do this deployment, and you can get the latest information from this site. And of course, tutorial. There's a bunch of nice tutorials in Microsoft Learn, and this is the nice way, to get up to date with that. And every other week or month, they actually deploy and add some more modules into that. So if you are into that and you want to add some modernization in your existing ARM templates, this is the good way to go and upskill yourself. All right, that's it. Now we came to that sweet moment where we are going to go through that Q&A section. I hope there are some questions in the audience.
Thanks, Elkhan, for the very nice session on Azure Bicep and some very cool demos. I'm gonna surely to check that GitHub repo of yours to try those demos.
And if you put a star there, it's even double happiness for me. If you like something, or I'll tell you something. Let's say you find something that can be done better, because from the knowledge that you gain, just let me know. I'm open to the change, because the whole idea why I put that there is so that community of developers and people who are interested can use that as a jump start and then educate me back, on anything that I missed out there.
Absolutely. So on that note, if anyone in the audience would like to ask Elkhan anything, or if you would like to discuss anything in general, please feel free to unmute yourself now and speak up.
Elkhan, I have a question.
Sure.
So, what we are doing in ARM templates, the inner templates are how we are doing the child ones, how we are using. So the Bicep also, we can use the same way on the accessing.
Child parent kind of, resources. That what you mean?
Yes.
Yes. So let me show you example. Yes, actually, I skipped probably from that. I didn't stop too much, but under the modules, I believe in these containers. No, loop containers, this one. I didn't deploy. But you see here, for example, when you have your storage account, if you know, there's a lot of services under it, right? You have like blob services, you have containers, you have containers and blob services under it, and then you have file shares and other services, right? There's like 6, I believe, of them. So the one way to do that is that whenever you deploy these resources, you can have parent where you don't, declare everything, but you say that, okay, this blob service actually the parent for this blob service is actually this storage account. So there's a relationship. And in addition to that, within the resource itself, we can declare a child resource and then actually reference that. And if you want to have more information about that, just, send me a message on LinkedIn. I would be happy to, guide you toward that. But yes, it's possible. It's there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because why I asked the question is during ARM templates, getting the link template with the passwords, it's a little bit difficult. They're accessing that one if you're using Azure DevOps. So there we are facing in our current project. That's where I asked the question. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, sure.
I have a quick question. So your opinion as far as infrastructure as code, I know Bicep is a recent domain-specific language from Microsoft. The level of effort in learning, for example, Bicep, as opposed to going just across the board with maybe Terraform, which is a generic middleware, and where you could then do infrastructure as code for GCP, AWS, and Azure. What is your opinion? I mean, I know Microsoft would try to make ARM more an abstraction for it, but stepping back a little bit, is the level of effort Terraform or Bicep or CloudFormation? What is your opinion on that?
That's a good question. So there are actually different tools for different purposes. That's where I will start. So I would myself consider Terraform for the scenarios where, as an organization, if you have to maintain your infrastructure as a code in more than one in Microsoft Azure as well as AWS or any other, then probably the investment that you want to make is a Terraform, because at that point your solution needs to be multi-cloud ready. At this point, the Bicep language, the purpose is not to make this product, multi-cloud ready. The purpose is it's a DSL, domain specific. The purpose is to make this Azure resource provisioning and management an easy and intuitive experience for beginners who have who didn't have this, prior knowledge of ARM templates, and they want to start, fast and doing. But in terms of level of effort learning, I would say if you are invested or if your customers are in Azure, Microsoft Azure, it makes definitely, good sense to learn about this Bicep language, Azure Bicep language, because there's a lot of investments that Microsoft is putting there. And in addition to that, if you are doing some complex deployments and maintaining, for example, there's like VLAN deployments that you can do as a code. This is much simpler to maintain in terms of magnitude of effort. In terms of magnitude of effort, sorry, it's much easier to be done on Bicep language, because that thing, Bicep language came, with a fresh idea to make things easier for developers and DevOps. That's why you would see that it's much easier to maintain all these new updates and things that are coming from Azure resources rather than doing that on others, on ARM template or Terraform. With Terraform, keep in mind, you are actually very dependent on that third-party provider. If Terraform doesn't give you, let's say, a module or a library to be able to work with that latest or whatever the Azure resource you are trying to do, let's say it's a VLAN, right, deployments, you wouldn't be able to do that because you are tied up yourself to a third party which is controlling the APIs and libraries. So that I would look at that more like, what you are trying to do, what as a business, what you are trying to achieve, and then selecting the right tool for right purpose.
So, okay, got it. So thank you. So basically, thanks for the answer. So basically, if you're if you're going to go with Terraform, you're kind of reliant on them having the providers in place as you need them, right?
Yes.
And if your company is really centric on Azure, then you probably would be better focusing on Bicep. If you're really a multi-cloud centric environment, then Terraform would be the way to go. But it sounds like you're saying still keep an eye on Bicep because that's where Microsoft is putting their focus.
And Mike, I can add one more point here. If you are starting with a greenfield implementation on a clean slate, you are starting a cloud environment, probably it makes sense to start with Bicep if you're just starting with Azure. But if you already have investment in Terraform, I have not found any specific reason that you should shift from Terraform to Bicep. But again, to what Elkhan said, I think if you are single cloud user, Bicep makes it pretty easy because people who have used ARM templates in the past, they know the struggle with maintaining and managing those ARM templates. Bicep is right now focused on making that experience simplified. And who knows, in future it might support deployment in other cloud providers as well, based on Azure Arc. We don't know what we don't know.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Secret information.
Thank you.
So, okay.
All right, I think we are on time. And if there is any more questions or comments, feel free to reach out to Elkhan on LinkedIn or Twitter. He is pretty active. He will be more than happy to answer anything else you might have. And Elkhan, once again, on the behalf of the user group, I would like to thank you for taking time out today to present to the user group.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. Thank you for everybody attending.